Welcome to my channel, and this is English Podcast.
The problem today that we're going to be addressing is translating too much in your head when speaking English. Why is that a problem? And I see that happening so much with students. You take much longer to come up with a sentence, for example. And as a teacher, as an experienced teacher, myself, I know when the student is translating, because usually when the student says something, the word order or the sentence itself is a little bit off or weird. So to me, it's a clear indication that the person is still translating in their head. So how can we fix this, Ksenia? So I'm going to throw it to you. What is one thing that our followers should start doing more to fix that?
I think we should be honest with our viewers, with our listeners. That's not easy, right? But the good thing is, like any other skill, like we talk a lot about speaking in English and practicing speaking and reading and listening and having a lot of practice, right, with those skills. But thinking in English is just another skill. So you can train your brain to think in English, right? It's possible, it's doable. And just to give you some idea of how you can do that, I wanted to share with you guys that for me personally, thinking in English is very close to this idea of improvisation. It's because thoughts come to us randomly, right? Like more often than not, we're not in control of our thoughts. Let's say, okay, here I am crossing the road, and suddenly I find myself thinking about my relationships. Are we moving in the right direction or in the same direction with my partner? Or I'm trying to decide whether to buy this super expensive, gym membership, right? Or rather save money for some trip. Thoughts just pop out of nowhere. So when you are in a conversation, the same happens there. You just have random thoughts, random questions, and you have to think on your feet, right? Right away, on spot. And here, it's very difficult to keep up with that pace of the thoughts that appear in your head if you have this bad habit of translating, right? You can't keep up. And I really like this saying that I wonder if you heard it, Cheka. So there is this saying, let me quote it, actually, I have it here. Preparation breeds spontaneity. So let me repeat. Preparation breeds spontaneity. In this context, what does it mean to breed?
Generates or produces.
To create something, yeah? So it may sound weird and counterintuitive because improvisation is something we do right now without planning it, naturally. So how can you prepare for something that you are not planning? Here's this trick, here's this thing. The solid foundation which you get when you prepare with knowledge, skills, and practice allow you to build on top of that and then have that confidence and creativity to respond to any unexpected situation, right? So in our case, in learning English, what is this knowledge, right? This knowledge is grammar, vocabulary, right? The structure of the sentence, what you mentioned. You don't want to compose it along the process like you were speaking, yeah? You want to give the right structure. And skills would be that. Speaking in English, analyzing, processing it, yeah? Thinking about response and having a conversation. And practice. I think we talked about this with you. You have to build a habit of deliberately thinking in English. And there are tons of simple exercises how to do that, right? I think we had a lesson on that. Start simple. Start with just describing everything you see in English. That's already first step towards thinking in English, right? Do you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I really like this point that you're making about being more comfortable with improvisation and improvising, because it's about being present in the moment and being okay with the unexpected. You did use some nice expressions there, Xenia. First of all, I remember you said thinking on your feet. What does that mean when you think on your feet?
It's again thinking spontaneously, right on spot when you were asked something, like you thinking on your feet, like in that moment.
So if a person always translates in their head, that person is not really thinking on their feet because there's always that wall or
delay also, right?
Delay, right? Okay, let me translate it first and then I'm going to say something in English, right?
Sometimes it takes eternity, right? To choose the right auxiliary verb. And you don't want to do that. Rather make a mistake, but, go on.
That makes a lot of sense because if you think about it, we try to help people here speak English in real life, in the real world. And real conversation in the real world is usually random, unexpected. So you gotta be okay with improvisation, with dancing according to the music, right? Let's say. So I really like that point. That reminds me of a student of mine. At first, when we started having classes together, she struggled a lot with this. She would always translate in her head to communicate her ideas. And not only did that make her speech much slower, but also, like I said earlier, a bit weird in terms of sentence construction. But then, I talked to her about this and she became aware of that. And now consciously, deliberately, every class, she tries not to think, in this case, in Portuguese, but always in English. And you know what? Her communication skills have gotten so much better because of that. Now she's speaking with more fluidity and the sentences she's actually coming up with make sense now. So sometimes it's just a matter of trusting our intuition, right? Because sometimes we think that we don't know much, but actually we know much more than we think if we just let it go.
Yeah, that's true. And I wonder what played the key part there in her transition from translating to thinking in English. Was it like, I don't know, immersion into language enough, or just like this deliberate thinking always in English, and how to do that? Like, for example, if our listener or viewer now asks, okay, I want to think in English, but like, how do I start thinking in English? Yeah,
I would say both points, Ksenia. She's a wonderful student that I have, and she's very committed, and she does practice her English every day. So that's the first point, and I believe you're going to expand more on this topic soon about living your English and connecting it to your interests. So she does that already, but also the deliberate aspect of it, because that was something that we discussed multiple times in our classes, the importance of letting go of translation and just using the English you already have, because you know some English already that you can use. So the combination of these two things, I would say, have played a key role for her.
Awesome. Yeah, you already mentioned like how we can connect it to Live Your English idea that we are teaching in our methodology, right? It's that it. Like anything you would have to do deliberately, you'll have to put in effort into that. And it won't work long term if you don't enjoy the process. So you have to trick the system. You have to choose what you already enjoy, right? So we want to talk about it again and again because this is such a simple thing that sometimes students just overlook. But that's just really simple. So imagine you have your interests, you have your hobbies, you are into photography or you're into pottery or beekeeping or brewery. I don't know, to choose yours. Learn about it in English. So you know already a lot about the topic in your native language. And that's what might prevent you from thinking in English because you rely too much on your native tongue. You rely too much on that information that you got in your native language about this topic. Now start learning something new or reviewing what you already know, but in English, right? You will have that immersion because, even to internalize those language patterns, not to think about language structure, you have to get yourself immersed enough amount of time into language. So start with that. Find some videos, find some podcasts about the topic you like and listen to it just to immerse into language, right? And another thing is what I talked about in the past. To be well prepared for improvisation, you have to have a solid foundation. So with immersing yourself into language, you expand your vocabulary, right? And that's what it gives you.
Speaking on topics close to you first makes perfect sense. And like you said, it's something so simple and small that many people overlook. You use that word. What does that mean when you overlook something?
Don't pay enough attention or don't pay attention at all. Just like, right? Mm-hmm. You're doing something, but then you overlook some other stuff.
Yeah, that's it. By the way, guys, as you can notice, we have been defining some really nice words and expressions today. So make sure you download the Real Life English app so you can review all this vocabulary from today's podcast and practice it over there. All right, don't forget to download it. So yeah, I really like what you're saying, Senna, because we start with the topics we are interested in first. That makes it much easier to start thinking in English. And then after we feel comfortable with those, we can branch out and start maybe dealing with topics that are not so familiar to us. But, you know, it's always nice to stretch our minds and our language skills, right? I really like that. One point I would make also about this is the importance of embracing uncertainty. I feel like students translate a lot sometimes because they need that feeling of certainty. I need to feel sure about what I'm saying. So first, I need to translate. But if you do that, that's never gonna, make you fluent, because you will always have that insecurity, that security blanket, as I like to call it. When I was a kid, I used to have one. I used to have a security blanket. It was this little piece of cloth. I was 3-4 years old, and I carried that thing with me all the time. I love the smell of it. I always laughed with it. And I remember I used to call it Nana, It was my Nana, that little piece of cloth there. But then one day, my mother threw it away. I think when I was 5, she just threw it away because she realized that, it's time to outgrow this, Thiago. So no more Nana. Yeah, you are growing. You are growing up. So I remember that when I realized that I didn't have it anymore, I felt scared. I felt insecure. I felt lost. And bringing that to English learning, once you start thinking more in English and not relying so much on translation, maybe at first you're going to feel a little lost. You're going to feel a little scared. That's okay. But it's part of growing up. As a language learner, you have to mature, you have to grow up, and it's part of the process. So keep doing it, and you will see that you're going to start feeling more comfortable with not relying on translation.
It's also like, embracing your inner child, maybe, right?
I really love that collocation, by the way, to embrace your inner child. What is your inner something?
This is something that's deep inside, related to your inner world, right?
I love that. Yeah, just like your inner thoughts, for example, yeah? The thoughts that come inside of you, right? Come from inside.
Coming from inside, right?
Right. Playing guitar is a skill that demands many hours of practice. You make mistakes. You spend hours and hours in a room just practicing, learning songs. It can be frustrating sometimes. But boy, is it fun. And you know what? Something very similar is English learning. Learning English is very similar to learning how to play an instrument, like the guitar, for example. If you want to be a great English speaker, you need to practice a lot of English. And we have the perfect resource for you to add more practice to your daily routine with English, the Real Life English app. With the app, you can practice new words and expressions using intelligent flashcards. Our app works with the spaced repetition system, which presents you with the words you're trying to learn at strategic times, so you never forget them again. Here's what one of our app users has to say.
Overall, this app was great. Their teaching skills were well organized and filled with confidence. I can trust them because I've been watching their YouTube videos for a long time. This testimonial comes from Lee.
So what are you waiting for? Join tens of thousands of learners who use the Real Life English app every day to get confident English. Start rocking your English with the app today, all right?
I just wanted to, to add something to what I was saying about immersion and everything. We started talking about like hobbies and learning about topics you already know in English, right? Here, I wanted to say that I strongly believe in that, but no, I think it's better to say that it's actually a fact that language is inseparable from culture. So take advantage there, and really, in order to start thinking in English, you should treat English as a friend. So when we have a new friend, we really want to know more about their interests, about how they behave, about how they react to this or that. So let's come back again to that example from Hobbies. Most probably, you learned something new when you watch some videos related to your hobby, but from the native's perspective. Don't you want to know how, for example, Americans approach beekeeping, or how Australians incorporate some Aboriginal traditions in pottery when they do pottery as a hobby, or when, I don't know, Brits have brewery as their hobby? And I don't know, was it a joke or something that every second household in rural England has their own home brewery or something? But, when you will be watching those videos in English, you will be expanding your vocabulary and you will be putting yourself in those people's shoes, right? You'll see with new eyes on the things that are already familiar to you, and vocabulary will stick naturally and more easily because this is something you enjoy, this is something you're curious about, this is something that is close to you. There is this emotional aspect to it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's worth defining brewery because you've used this word a couple of times in this episode. So brewery is the process of making beer, right? You brew beer, you make beer, correct?
Correct. And brewery is like a workshop or like a place where you do that. It can be like a factory or it can be like at home, like homemade beer.
Yeah. But, that point you made is really important as well. Not only consuming content on topics that you like, but also from the native speaker's perspective, Americans, British, Australian, because the reference is also important. Yeah, I mean, what kind of English are you exposing yourself to on a daily basis? That is also going to directly contribute to your ability to think in English and to speak English because it influences the way we communicate, right?
Yeah, and learning language always goes like hand in hand with learning about the cultures and tradition of that of people who speak that language, right? Of that country.
Yeah, that is true. I would also say, Ksenia, you mentioned earlier about the importance of embracing your inner child, and connected to that, I think that it's also important for you to be okay with speaking like a child. At least at first. This is one way for you to get rid of translation once and for all. Ksenia, let's do a little mental picture here, okay? Picture an adult in your home country, in Ukraine, who is very successful in his or her field, professionally speaking. In my case, I picture here in Brazil a successful lawyer. I picture a Brazilian lawyer who communicates extremely well in Portuguese already. The person is articulate. The person is eloquent in Portuguese. The person has written articles related to law. The person is really well accomplished. All right? Who do you picture?
Oh, that's a
Ukraine?
nice question. I don't know. I thought of maybe an owner of a restaurant, of a fancy restaurant. You would call them chef, right? Or
Yeah. So, or a restaurateur, we can say.
oh, what an advanced word, right?
Right. It's so French, sounds so French, right? But anyway, going back to the lawyer that I picture,
Okay.
I said that he is very articulate, very eloquent in Portuguese. Do you think that if he is a pre-intermediate or intermediate level speaker of English, do you think that he's going to be able to communicate as fluently, as eloquently in English as he can in Portuguese?
That depends on the context, right? I believe like if he has some informal meeting with his clients, informal, yeah, he will do pretty much fine, right? It will be like great, but maybe he would need a little bit more practice and knowledge if he goes into a legal context in English, right?
That is absolutely true. And that's exactly my point, because I see that sometimes in students, because usually my students, they are well-accomplished professionals already. You know, they are usually at the peak of their career and they are successful in whatever it is they do professionally. But the English is the thing that, you know, holds them back. And I feel this frustration sometimes. Like, you know, I know they can communicate wonderfully in Portuguese, for example. But in English, they want to communicate at the same high level, but they can't yet because they don't have the tools for that yet in English. So it's important to be okay with maybe speaking more childish at first, or not as a grown-up as you would like to speak, because you are still in the process of learning the language. That's my point. But if you keep doing it, you will get to that point where you're going to be maybe expressing yourself in English similarly to the way you express yourself in your native language, in terms of sophistication, I mean.
Yeah, you just reminded me of a video I watched last week with a French director. Her movie was nominated for Oscar, and she was given an interview. And so her English was, like you're saying, she was okay in, maybe in the bar with her friends. But when she was giving an interview, she was like really making such great effort, and she was doing great job with that. Like she tried to answer all the questions in English. She was struggling, but she was trying. But when it came to some really specific questions that she really wanted to express her thought clearly, she switched to French and turned for help for her interpreter.
Look at that. So that happens, right?
Happens, yeah.
It does happen, but it's part of the process. Well, Ksenia, let's do a quick wrap up here, or let's say recap of some of the points we have already covered today. So how can you get rid of translation? First of all, you have to actively, deliberately train your brain to think in English. It has to be deliberate and intentional, right? What else have we covered today?
So start something that is close to you. I mean, like start thinking about things that are close to you. Learn more about your hobbies from the native's perspective. That will give you the certain amount of new vocabulary and confidence to talk about something you love in English and think about it, right?
Nice. And finally, like I said, embracing uncertainty and embracing your inner child. Be okay with sounding a little bit childish or not as sophisticated as you do in your first language, and get rid of that security blanket. Grow up, let's say. Grow up as an English learner and stop
Like it.
translating. Just,
Good.
you know, like my mom did with me, you know, when I was 5, you know, grow up, you know, you don't have age anymore to use this blanket thing anymore. Ksenia, I shared with you this week that nice video from Will Smith about skydiving. Did you get a chance to watch it?
Yeah, I watched it. That was nice. I mean, that was fun and thought-provoking.